used to think that family loyalty was the one currency in life that never lost its value. Money came and went, fortunes rose and fell, but love between parent and child, well, that was supposed to be untouchable, indestructible. I believed that until the day I realized mine had been pawned off for a handful of lies and a line of credit. For most of my 68 years, I had lived modestly. Not poorly, no. Never that. But with a kind of deliberate frugality that made every dollar stretch like it was on an exercise plan. My late husband, Paul, and I raised our children in a house where the mortgage was always paid on time, the pantry was never empty, and you could walk barefoot across the kitchen floor without fear of finding a penny, because we believed in putting those pennies in the bank. We worked hard, saved harder, and dreamed of a retirement where we could travel, spoil the grandchildren, and maybe, just maybe, buy that little lake cabin we used to talk about when the summer heat made the city feel like an oven. But Paul never made it to retirement. A heart attack took him 12 years too soon, and with him went the certainty that our plans would ever be realized. After the funeral, I sold his truck, paid off the last of the home repairs we'd been working on, and tucked away the rest of the insurance money in a savings account I swore I wouldn't touch unless the roof caved in or the country fell apart. I told myself I'd be fine, and I was, until Ben came knocking. Ben, my only son, my once proud boy, showed up on a rainy April afternoon, looking like a man who'd been running through life without an umbrella. The suit was wrinkled, the tie loose, his hair damp from the mist outside. I remember thinking he looked smaller somehow, like the years had taken more from him than just his youth. He sat at my kitchen table, fingers tapping against the mug of coffee I'd poured him, and told me the story. The business wasn't doing well. It had been a bad quarter, no, 2 bad quarters, and the mortgage payment was coming due. His wife, Mallory, was beside herself with worry. They didn't want to lose the house. The kids loved their school. The neighborhood was perfect. Could I help? Just until things turned around? I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for bank statements or proof of hardship. This was my son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep through fevers, the young man I'd stood beside when he buried his father. If he said they needed help, then by God they needed help. The first month, I wrote the check directly to their lender. Ben called me the next day, voice thick with gratitude, promising it was only temporary. 2 months, maybe 3. By the end of that summer, the 3 months had become 6, and we'd agreed to make the payments automatic, just for ease, as he put it. I still had enough coming in from Paul's pension and Social Security to keep myself afloat. And besides, what was I going to do with all that money? Sit on it until I was too old to enjoy it? That was the story I told myself. Over the years, my life began to shrink around those payments. I stopped going to the diner with my old church friends on Tuesday mornings. My garden got smaller because I couldn't afford the annual delivery of fresh soil and mulch. I traded my annual trip to see my sister in Oregon for video calls, always telling her, maybe next year. And whenever I felt the sting of resentment, I reminded myself, Ben is trying. They're struggling. We're family. That's what family does. The illusion began to crack the day Mallory called me crying over the phone, saying the power company was threatening to shut off service. I sent the money that afternoon, shaking my head at how quickly things could spiral for them. But that night, unable to sleep, I opened Facebook for the first time in months. There she was, Mallory, my daughter-in-law, grinning beside a palm tree with a piña colada in her hand. The caption read, "Much-needed getaway, Turks and Caicos never disappoints." The timestamp told me it had been posted just 3 days before that tearful phone call. I stared at that photo until my eyes blurred, trying to reconcile the tanned skin, the manicured nails, the resort bracelet on her wrist with the woman who'd sworn they couldn't keep the lights on. I told myself there had to be some mistake. Maybe it was an old picture. Maybe it was a work trip Ben hadn't mentioned. But the more I scrolled, the less room there was for doubt. A post from their daughter showing off a brand new MacBook. A check-in at a high-end steakhouse downtown. Pictures from a ski trip in Aspen, while I was eating peanut butter on crackers to make my grocery money last. That night, something shifted in me. I remembered Paul telling me once, back when Ben was still a teenager, that generosity without boundaries wasn't kindness. It was a leash. If you give people the rope, he'd said, some will use it to climb higher, others will hang you with it. I used to think that was too cynical. Now, I wasn't so sure. Still, I didn't confront them. Not yet. The human heart is a stubborn thing, and a mother's heart doubly so. I wanted to believe there was an explanation that wouldn't shatter what was left of our family bond. I wanted to believe my son hadn't turned my love into a bank account with no closing hours. So I played along. I kept sending the mortgage payments. I kept nodding sympathetically when they mentioned tough times. I even chipped in for a home repair that, as I later learned, was actually a patio renovation for their summer parties. But I began to watch them differently, with the quiet, unblinking patience of someone who knows a storm is coming and has no intention of warning the people standing in the rain. Every interaction was filed away in my mind, the way Mallory's eyes lit up when she talked about their next big trip, the way Ben dodged questions about his work, the sudden silences whenever I walked into a room where they'd been talking. The clues were there, scattered like breadcrumbs, leading me to a truth I was no longer afraid to see. It's a strange thing, watching the people you love build a house of cards with your money. You want to admire the architecture, the way each flimsy piece leans on the next, but you can't ignore the fact that the whole thing will collapse the moment you stop holding your breath. And me? I was tired of holding my breath. I didn't know it then, but the end had already begun. It was just a matter of time before the illusion of their struggle and my role in saving them would be exposed for what it truly was, a performance. One they'd been perfecting for years, and one I was about to stop buying tickets to. The breaking point didn't arrive in some grand cinematic fashion. It didn't come with a slam door, a shouting match, or some lightning bolt of betrayal. It came on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-October in the form of a voice message from my friend Shirley. Shirley and I go back 50 years. College roommates, bridesmaids at each other's weddings, godmothers to each other's firstborns. She's the kind of friend who tells you if you've got lipstick on your teeth, and also the kind who notices things you wish she wouldn't. Her message was short, almost casual. "Hey, hun, saw Ben and Mallory last weekend at that new wine tasting place in Napa. You know, the one with the private vineyard tours? Anyway, they looked great. So tan. Thought you'd be happy to hear they're doing so well. Let's catch up soon." I must have replayed it 3 times, my thumb hovering over the phone screen, as if hearing it again would somehow make the words change into something less damning. Napa. Private tours. Doing so well. My kitchen clock ticked in the silence that followed, each second landing like a hammer on a nail. Only 2 weeks earlier, Ben had sat in that very chair by the window, telling me they were barely treading water and might have to pull the kids from their extracurriculars to save money. I'd agreed to send an extra payment that month just until they caught up, and now, Napa. I walked to the counter, poured myself the last of the morning coffee, and took it black. My stomach was already too tight for cream. The human brain has a funny way of cataloging betrayal. It doesn't keep it in neat files you can flip through. It piles it in a corner, where it sits and rots until something disturbs the heap. And once disturbed, the smell hits you all at once. Suddenly, everything reeked. The unexpected plumbing repair from last year, was that really about a burst pipe? Or was it about funding the new kitchen island I'd seen in Mallory's Facebook post? The emergency dental bill for one of the kids. Was that before or after the photos of them grinning at Disneyland? The time they swore they couldn't afford Christmas gifts, was that the same year they flew first class to Hawaii in January? Every excuse, every sympathetic sigh I'd given, every dollar that had left my account, it all stacked up in my mind, brick on brick, building something that didn't feel like a house at all. It felt like a prison. I wanted to believe there was some reasonable explanation. Mothers cling to that kind of hope, the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. But even driftwood can drag you under if you hold on too long. That evening, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I looked. Not just at Facebook, but at Instagram too. I made an account under a name no one would recognize, sent follow requests to Mallory's friends, and within an hour I was inside their curated little kingdom. And oh, what a kingdom it was. Cabo San Lucas in the spring, a week in Paris the year before, matching designer luggage sets, each tagged with a Wasserfur travel goals. Dinners at restaurants where the menu didn't list prices because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. There was even a post from last month, a picture of their backyard transformed into a luxury entertaining space, complete with a fire pit, outdoor kitchen, and string lights that must have cost more than my first car. The caption, so worth the investment, cheers to making memories. An investment, my investment. I sat there in the glow of my laptop screen, scrolling through photo after photo, my hands growing colder with each swipe. And then I saw it, a selfie of Mallory in a silk robe, holding a champagne flute. Behind her, in the reflection of a massive gilded mirror, was Ben. My Ben smiling, holding up 2 fingers in a peace sign like some overgrown frat boy. The location tag read, The Ritz-Carlton, Half Moon Bay. 3 days before he'd called me asking for help with their overdue water bill. That was the moment. The moment my chest stopped aching with confusion and started burning with something sharper, cleaner. Rage has a way of clarifying things. I closed the laptop, my reflection faint in the black screen. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her eyes were too steady, too calculating. She wasn't the mother who made excuses for her child's lies. She wasn't the widow who let guilt and love blind her to manipulation. She was someone else now. Someone who understood that love without respect is just charity. The next day, I went about my usual routine. Coffee, morning walk, tending to the small patch of garden I'd managed to keep alive. But in my mind, the gears were turning. I thought about Paul's voice, low and certain, warning me decades ago about people who confuse generosity with obligation. I thought about all the ways I'd let myself be trained, yes, trained, into believing my financial help was the glue holding our family together. What a joke! By the time the sun set, I had made my decision. There would be no confrontation, no teary scene where I demanded answers I already knew. No, I'd learned something important in all my years. People who take advantage of you will always find a way to make themselves the victim when you finally push back. So I wouldn't give them that chance. The end would come quietly, like a switch being flipped. No more mortgage payments, no more emergency wires, no more bailing them out while they sipped champagne in coastal resorts. I would simply stop, and I wouldn't tell them until they felt it. There's a peculiar kind of power in silence. People think noise is what shakes the ground. Raised voices, slammed doors, the shattering of glass. But no, the real tremors come when someone who's always answered stops picking up the phone. When the tap that's been running for years suddenly runs dry. The morning after I decided, I woke before the sun, made a pot of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and sat at my kitchen table with my checkbook, bank statements, and a yellow legal pad. The paper was lined, neat, obedient, ready to hold a truth I'd avoided for far too long. I started at the beginning. Month by month, year by year, I wrote it all down. The first mortgage payment, the temporary extra payment when Ben's hours were cut, the utilities when the air conditioning broke, the school fees when the district raised costs unexpectedly, the emergency Christmas bonus when Mallory's parents decided to visit and she wanted the house presentable. By the time I put the pen down, my hand ached and the page was full. The total sat at the bottom, underlined twice. $12,460. And that was just the money I could trace directly. Not the birthdays I'd skimped on, not the trips I'd canceled, not the little luxuries, fresh flowers, a decent winter coat, that I'd quietly told myself I didn't need. I stared at the number until it stopped looking like money and started looking like years. 5 years, to be exact. 5 years of watching my retirement shrink into someone else's glossy vacation photos. I closed the checkbook, slid the legal pad into a drawer, and reached for the phone. The bank's automated system greeted me with that too cheerful voice they all have, the kind designed to sound friendly while asking for your mother's maiden name and the street you grew up on. When I finally reached a human, her name was Chelsea, young, bright-voiced, probably not old enough to rent a car. She pulled up my account. "Yes, ma'am, I see the automatic transfer here. $2,800 a month to..." "Oh, Wells Fargo Mortgage Services." She hesitated just a fraction. "How long have you been making this payment?" 5 years, I said. "And you'd like to..." "Cancel it," I replied, my voice as even as if I were ordering a sandwich. "Effective when?" "Immediately." Her keyboard clattered. "All right, that's done. You'll see the change in your next statement. Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" I almost laughed. The girl had no idea she'd just helped me sever the most expensive leash I'd ever worn. "No, Chelsea," I said. "That's everything." When I hung up, the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. It felt different. Not larger, exactly, but freer. Like a room where someone had finally opened a window after years of stale air. That afternoon, I went grocery shopping for myself. I didn't skip the bakery section this time. I bought the crusty sourdough I loved, the one I'd stopped buying because it was too indulgent. I picked up fresh berries instead of frozen. I bought a bottle of the good olive oil and, just because I could, a small bouquet of yellow tulips. It was such a small thing, standing at the checkout line with a cart full of food for me and me alone. But it felt like planting a flag in new territory. And yet, the beauty of a silent decision is that no one notices right away. Ben and Mallory would have to wait until the first mortgage payment bounced before the reality began to creep in. And even then, they'd think it was a mistake. Maybe the bank made an error. Maybe Mom forgot. Maybe she's just late this month. They wouldn't see it for what it was, the end of their free ride. Not at first, and I wasn't going to tell them. Instead, I started reclaiming pieces of my life. I called the contractor who'd given me an estimate on fixing the loose railing on my porch and told him to go ahead. I ordered new curtains for the living room, a pale green that made the whole space feel like spring even as October slid toward winter. I even started looking at flight prices to Oregon. My sister nearly cried when I told her I was coming for Christmas this year. "It's been too long," she said. "Yes," I replied, glancing at the stack of mail on the counter, knowing there'd be no invitations from Ben's house this holiday season. Not that I'd have accepted. It has. The first real hint of trouble came 3 weeks later, in the form of a voicemail from Ben. His voice was casual, almost too casual. "Hey, Mom. Weird thing. Our mortgage company says they didn't get last month's payment. You might want to check with your bank. Probably just a glitch, but, before it gets messy." I didn't call back. A week after that, another message. The tone was different this time, tighter, like a belt pulled one notch too far. Mom, it's Ben again. Wells Fargo says they still haven't gotten the payment. Can you call me when you get this?" Still, I stayed silent, and in that silence, I felt myself grow stronger. They'd spent 5 years thinking of me as a safety net, something soft to catch them whenever they fell or whenever they wanted to avoid the fall entirely. But here's the thing about safety nets. They're not meant to be hammocks. I wasn't going to carry them anymore, not financially, not emotionally. And I knew, deep down, that once they realized the net was gone, they'd either learn to stand on their own or they'd hit the ground hard. Either way, I wouldn't be there to break the fall. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about a life built on borrowed money. It doesn't collapse like a building in an earthquake. It frays, little by little, thread by expensive thread. The first sign came at the beginning of November when Mallory posted on Facebook about cherishing cozy family nights at home instead of wasting money on overhyped restaurants. She dressed it up in hashtags. Simple joys, family first. But I could read between the lines. I'd paid for enough of those overhyped dinners to know she didn't give them up willingly. 2 weeks later, I ran into my neighbor Carol at the grocery store. She leaned on her cart, chatting the way people do when they've got more to say than they're willing to admit outright. "Saw your Ben the other day," she said, lowering her voice a fraction. "He was driving that old sedan you used to have. Guess he's finally giving the SUV a rest." I smiled politely. I didn't tell her that the SUV probably wasn't resting at all. It was likely gone. Maybe sold, maybe repossessed. Either way, a man who'd spent 5 years pulling up to my house in a gleaming black Escalade wasn't suddenly nostalgic for my 10-year-old Toyota. By December, the changes were harder to hide. Their Christmas lights went up late and looked sparse. The kind of half-hearted arrangement you do when you don't want to spend money on new strands or hire the professional service they'd used the past few years. No synchronized twinkling, no glowing reindeer on the lawn. Just a few tired strings sagging over the eaves, one bulb already burned out near the garage. I drove past their house one evening after dark on my way home from visiting my sister, and couldn't help noticing the shadows in the windows. The once glowing living room, usually lit up for anyone passing by to admire, was dim. The only light came from the flicker of the TV, casting long, lonely stripes across the lawn. I didn't linger. Just one slow turn of the wheel, and I was gone. The image stored away like a photograph I didn't need, but would keep anyway. By January, the veneer was cracking. I heard from Shirley again. She'd been at a local charity auction, an event Mallory never missed. If only to post photos of herself in a rented evening gown holding a champagne flute like she was born to it. This year, Shirley said, there was no sign of her. It was strange, she added. Everyone noticed. Of course they did. People like Mallory live for those rooms, for the clink of glasses and the whispered compliments. Not showing up meant she couldn't afford to, or couldn't face the questions if she did. Either way, it was a loss. In February, the real giveaway came. I was at the post office mailing a care package to my niece when I saw Ben in line ahead of me. He didn't notice me at first. His head was bent over a stack of envelopes, and the worry lines between his eyebrows looked deeper than I remembered. When the clerk told him the postage total, he hesitated before pulling out his wallet. That hesitation, that tiny pause, told me more than any phone call could have. I didn't say hello. I didn't offer to help. I just waited until he left. Then stepped forward to mail my own package, my hand steady on the counter. A week later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail, as I had with every call I didn't want to take lately. When I listened later, it was Mallory. Her voice tight, polite in a way that was almost brittle. Hi, it's Mallory. I know things have been a little strained lately, but we're having a small get-together next weekend for my birthday. Just family. Oh, we'd love for you to come. She didn't mention the missing mortgage payments. She didn't mention the calls I hadn't returned. She certainly didn't apologize. No, this was fishing. Testing the waters to see if I'd show up, see if maybe I'd forgotten the silent decision I'd made. I didn't call back. Because here's the truth. Watching their decline wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. It was about clarity. Every canceled trip, every missed event, every scaled-back display was proof that I'd been holding up more of their world than I'd ever realized. And now that my hands were gone, the weight was starting to crush them. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a certain grim satisfaction in that. It's not that I wanted them to fail. I just wanted them to see the truth, that without my quiet, consistent sacrifices, their life didn't run on charm and entitlement alone. It ran on my money, my choices, my years, and now they were running out. I knew the real reckoning was still ahead. Missed mortgage payments don't stay hidden forever, and the bank is far less patient than a mother. But for now, I was content to watch from the sidelines as the cracks widened, knowing that I'd built a different kind of life in the meantime, one where I owed no one and belonged to myself. It was early March when I noticed the for sale sign go up in the yard of the craftsman-style house next to Ben and Mallory's. I was driving past after visiting a friend, the winter sun low and sharp in the sky, when the red and white post caught my eye. It was a nice house, smaller than theirs, but charming. White trim, a porch swing, a yard that looked like it would bloom into something beautiful come spring. The kind of place you could imagine kids running around in, the sound of laughter spilling through the open windows. I didn't think much of it at first. Houses came and went on that street. People moved on. New families moved in. Life rolled forward. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop picturing it. The proximity, the vantage point it offered. A front row seat to their life without needing to step foot in their home. A way to exist in their world without belonging to it. By morning, The idea had taken root. I called the realtor listed on the sign. Her name was Dana, a warm, quick-talking woman who seemed genuinely surprised when I told her I was interested in a cash offer. We met that afternoon for a walkthrough. Inside, the place felt untouched. The kind of home where the owners had cared for every detail but hadn't stripped it of its soul. Hardwood floors that creaked in the right places, a kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon, a living room with just enough space for the furniture I already owned. I didn't tell Dana my real reason for wanting it. I just nodded when she talked about investment potential and proximity to great schools. We shook hands in the front yard while the March wind tugged at my coat. 30 days later, it was mine. The first time I pulled into that driveway, I could see their house from the corner of my eye. Ben's driveway empty, the blinds in the front windows half closed. It was a weekday afternoon, and the street was quiet except for the sound of a leaf blower somewhere down the block. I unlocked the door, stepped into my new home, and smiled. Not because I'd won anything. This wasn't about beating them. It was about reclaiming space. Physical space. Emotional space. The kind they'd tried to shrink for me over the last 5 years. Over the next week, I moved in slowly. I brought over my favorite recliner, the quilt my mother had made, the chipped but beloved dining table Paul and I had bought at an estate sale 30 years ago. The place began to feel like mine in a way my old house never truly had since his passing. I planted tulips along the walkway, the same yellow ones I'd bought for myself that day after canceling the mortgage payments. I hung a wind chime on the porch, the kind that makes a low, soothing tone when the wind shifts. I put up string lights along the eaves, not the blinding, showy kind Ben and Mallory used to hang, but soft, warm bulbs that made the house glow in the evenings. Then I started hosting. At first, it was just coffee with a few friends from church, then a Saturday afternoon barbecue with my sister and her kids, then a Sunday dinner for neighbors who'd waved to me for years but never really knew me. Word spread. People came. The sound of conversation and laughter spilled into the street, the smell of grilled food drifting toward their porch. I didn't invite Ben or Mallory, not out of spite, but because this was my space now, and it was for people who valued me. I caught glimpses of them sometimes. Mallory peeking through the blinds, Ben walking to the mailbox slower than necessary, pretending to check his phone while his eyes flicked toward my yard. If they were curious, they didn't say so. If they were jealous, they didn't admit it. But I could feel the shift. The power dynamic was changing. Once upon a time, I'd been the one watching their parties from the outside, scrolling through pictures of events I wasn't invited to, feeling like a guest in my own family's story. Now they were the ones outside the circle, and they knew it. The irony wasn't lost on me, that the woman they'd excluded from their table was now hosting her own just a few steps away. But I didn't gloat, not openly. My revenge, if you could even call it that, wasn't in making them miserable. It was in showing them, without a single word, that I didn't need them to have the life they'd denied me. One evening, as the sun dipped low and my guests lingered over dessert, I heard the faint sound of music drifting from my porch into the cool spring air. Someone laughed, a deep, genuine laugh, and I saw Ben's silhouette in the window next door, standing still for just a moment before turning away. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something cleaner, lighter, like the first breath after years of holding it in. This was the next chapter, and it was mine. By April, the contrast was impossible to ignore. On my side of the street, the grass was green, the tulips were open, and the air on weekends carried the smell of grilled chicken, peach cobbler, and the kind of coffee you keep brewing because the conversation just won't stop. On theirs, the lawn was patchy. The flower beds, once meticulously maintained, were bare except for a few stubborn weeds. Their porch light, which used to shine until midnight, now flickered on and off at odd hours. And the driveway, once home to an expensive SUV, sat mostly empty, except for Ben's aging sedan. It wasn't just the physical difference, it was the energy. Neighbors who used to stop at their porch for small talk now lingered on mine. People waved as they walked their dogs past my yard, often stepping inside the gate when they caught the scent of something good cooking. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses would drift down the street, drawing glances from behind their blinds. I didn't set out to make it a competition. I really didn't. But life has a way of staging its own theater, and when the set pieces are this stark, the audience can't help but notice. It started small. Mrs. Reynolds from 3 houses down mentioned, in a voice just shy of a whisper, "It's so nice to see a home on this street lively again. Used to be theirs, you know, every Christmas, every 4th of July, but it's been quieter lately." Quieter. That was the polite word. By May, the silence next door was beginning to feel like a vacuum. The annual spring block party came around, and for the first time in years, Ben and Mallory weren't the hosts. They didn't offer their yard, didn't bring their usual catered spread, didn't even volunteer to help set up. The committee met at my place instead. I made fresh lemonade, set out platters of deviled eggs, and before I knew it, my house was buzzing with neighbors swapping stories and laughing in the kitchen while I mixed salad dressing from scratch. When the party day came, the street was alive with folding tables, paper lanterns, and kids darting between yards. I set up my grill and kept the burgers coming, chatting with people I'd known in passing for years but never really talked to. From where I stood, flipping patties, I could see their front door. It stayed shut. Once I thought I saw the curtain shift in the upstairs window, but it was gone so fast I couldn't be sure. People noticed. They always do. "They've gotten so private lately," someone murmured over a plate of potato salad. "Private," another replied, "or maybe they're just avoiding questions." The thing about community is it has a memory. People remember who showed up, who pitched in, who kept the lights on, figuratively and literally, and people talk. By early summer, the shift was complete. Mallory, who used to be the unofficial social chair of the street, now seemed like a ghost. She'd still post the occasional filtered photo on social media, an artfully arranged coffee cup, a sunset shot from the backyard, but the comments were fewer, the likes sparser. The curated life she'd once displayed so proudly was fading at the edges. Meanwhile, my house was becoming a hub. On Tuesday evenings, a few of us gathered for card games. Friday nights turned into potluck dinners. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch with iced tea until the streetlights flickered on, swapping stories and letting the hours slip by. It wasn't about replacing them in the neighborhood hierarchy. It was about building something real. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't see the impact it was having on them. The whispers grew louder, not cruel, just curious. "Is everything okay over there? They used to travel all the time. What happened? I heard the bank's been sending letters." I never joined in those conversations. I didn't need to. The contrast spoke for itself. One warm Saturday evening, I was hosting a casual dinner on the porch. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a peach pie that had people asking for seconds, when I caught sight of Ben out of the corner of my eye. He was walking to his car, head down, hands in his pockets. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. He hesitated like he might come over. Then he turned and kept walking. I didn't call after him. Later that night, after everyone had gone and I was stacking plates in the sink, I thought about that moment, the way he'd looked, tired, thinner, but with something else in his eyes. Not anger, not even resentment, something closer to longing. It struck me then that this was the real difference. My house wasn't just full of people, it was full of welcome. Something money could never buy and pride could never fake. Next door, the lights stayed on late, but no one came in or out. It was a Tuesday evening in late August, hot enough that the air clung to your skin, but not so hot you couldn't stand to sit on the porch with a glass of iced tea. I was halfway through a mystery novel when I heard the sound of footsteps on my walkway. Hesitant, uneven. When I looked up, Ben was standing at the bottom of the steps. He wasn't dressed for show this time. No tailored suit, no polished shoes, just a faded polo shirt and jeans that had seen better days. His hair was mussed, his face drawn, even from the porch. I could see the new lines carved around his eyes. "Hey, Mom," he said, like the word might break in his mouth if he didn't say it softly enough. I closed my book and set it aside. "Evening, Ben." He stayed on the bottom step for a beat, like he wasn't sure if he was invited up. Finally, he climbed the remaining steps and sank into the chair across from me. The wicker creaked under his weight. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of crickets filling the gap. "I guess you know why I'm here," he said. "I imagine it has something to do with your mortgage," I replied. My voice was calm, almost detached. His jaw tightened. "We're behind. More than behind. The bank's talking foreclosure." I didn't say anything. I wanted him to fill the silence, and he did. "We thought maybe you didn't realize what stopping the payments would do." He looked at me then, his eyes searching for some flicker of guilt. "We thought maybe you forgot, or there was some kind of mistake." "No mistake," I said. He swallowed. "We can't make the payments without your help." The old me, the one from 5 years ago, would have been reaching for her checkbook already, calculating what she could cut from her own budget to cover them. But that woman was gone. "You managed just fine in Napa," I said, "and Paris, and Aspen, and Half Moon Bay, at least until I stopped footing the bill." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "You've been keeping track." "I've been paying attention," I corrected. "There's a difference." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom, I know we made mistakes. I know we didn't—" He stopped, exhaled hard. "I didn't protect you from Mallory's attitude, and I should have. But you have to understand, if we lose the house, everything changes." "Maybe it needs to change," I said. He stared at me for a long moment. "You'd really just let us lose everything?" I met his gaze steadily. "You already lost something more important, Ben. My trust, my respect, and you gave it away long before the bank came calling." He looked down at his hands, twisting them together like a boy caught in a lie. "I thought—" He shook his head. "I thought you liked helping. I thought it made you feel included." The honesty in that sentence cut deeper than any accusation, because he'd believed it, because maybe, in some twisted way, I had believed it too, for a while. "It wasn't help," I said quietly. "It was a leash, and I let you hold the other end." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. Is there any way back from this? That depends, I said. If you're asking me to write another check, no. If you're asking if we can have a relationship again, maybe. But not the one we had before. That one's gone. His throat worked as he nodded. Mallory won't like that. She doesn't have to, I said. This isn't about her. That got the faintest, most tired smile out of him. The kind of smile that said he knew exactly what kind of storm was waiting for him at home. We sat there another few minutes, not saying much. The sun dipped lower, casting the yard in long shadows. Finally, he stood. I guess I'll figure something out, he said. You will, I replied, or you won't. Either way, it's not my burden anymore. At the steps, he paused and looked back. For what it's worth, I miss the way things used to be. Before all this, I held his gaze. So do I, but wishing won't bring it back. He nodded once, then walked away. When his car disappeared around the corner, I picked my book back up, though I didn't read. Instead, I sat there in the gathering dark, listening to the wind and the tulips, feeling the strange, bittersweet mix of grief and relief. He'd finally come to my door, not as the golden boy who thought he was untouchable, but as a man facing the collapse of the life he'd built on someone else's dime. And for the first time in years, I wasn't there to catch him. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. And clarity, I'd learned, was worth more than any house. The foreclosure notice came in mid-September. I didn't hear it from Ben. I saw it in the county records, which are public if you know where to look, and I'd learned to look. There it was, in black and white. 3 months in arrears, bank proceedings initiated. A slow, bureaucratic dismantling of the house I'd once thought of as their forever home. The same house I'd poured over $200,000 into keeping afloat. The same house I'd never truly been welcome in. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity either. What I felt was distance, like I was reading about a storm in another state. The next time I saw Ben, it was at the grocery store. He was pushing a cart with one wheel that squeaked, his hair a little longer, his clothes rumpled. He stopped when he saw me. We exchanged the kind of polite smiles people give when they're not sure if they're still allowed into each other's lives. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Hi, Ben." He looked like he might say more, but in the end, he just nodded and kept moving, and I let him go, because I had somewhere to be. That Sunday, I was hosting a dinner for my sister, her kids, and a couple of neighbors. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Laughter spilled out onto the porch as people arrived, shaking the early autumn chill from their coats. I'd strung up more of those warm white lights I liked, the ones that made every evening feel like a celebration. After we ate, the kids spread out their school projects on the dining table, carefully glued collages, hand-painted posters, a diorama of the solar system made from foam balls and toothpicks. They wanted me to judge them, like a real science fair. I gave each one a ribbon and a hug because they'd all done work worth noticing. As I stood there, surrounded by people who wanted me in the room, not for my money, not for what I could provide, but for who I was, I felt something loosen in my chest. This was family, not the kind you're born into out of obligation, but the kind you build out of mutual care. The kind that doesn't keep a ledger because it doesn't need one. That night, after the dishes were done and the last guest had gone, I stepped out onto the porch with a glass of the good wine I'd been saving. Across the way, Ben's house was dark except for a single light in an upstairs window. The lawn was overgrown, the mailbox leaning slightly to one side. It was a picture of absence. I wondered if he was inside packing boxes or sitting in the dark trying to figure out what went wrong. Maybe he was thinking about the years when the mortgage was paid before it was due, when the fridge was full, when he didn't have to wonder if the lights would stay on. Maybe, for the first time, he was realizing the cost of the arrogance that had kept me outside his door. But I didn't dwell on it. I turned my gaze back to my own porch, to the string lights swaying gently in the evening breeze, to the smell of bread still lingering in the air, to the sound of my own breathing, steady, unhurried. I'd spent 5 years giving away pieces of myself to keep someone else's life propped up. Now, in the quiet warmth of my own home, I was finally spending that same energy on me. True retirement, I was learning, wasn't just about stepping away from work. It was about stepping away from the people and patterns that drained you dry. It was about reclaiming your time, your space, your joy, and protecting them like they were the most valuable investments you'd ever made, because they are. When I went back inside, I stopped at the mantel. Paul's picture sat there, his easy smile captured in a frame I'd polished that morning. Next to him was a new photo, me with my sister's family at the summer barbecue, laughing so hard my eyes were almost closed. "I think you'd like it here," I said to him softly. "I think you'd be proud I finally learned when to stop giving." The wind rattled the chimes on the porch, low and melodic, as if in answer. I smiled, set down my wine, and turned out the lights. Tomorrow, there would be coffee in the kitchen, sunlight through the curtains, maybe another neighbor stopping by to share a recipe. Tomorrow, the life I'd built for myself would still be here, steady, honest, and mine. And that, I thought as I climbed into bed, was worth more than any house I'd ever saved. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.